Thank you all so much for coming out. Really appreciate it. Honored to be here. It's get-togethers like this, the more intimate ones, that I really look forward most to on the campaign trail. They make me better at the job. They give me a real ground's-eye view into what's going on in communities all across the district. A little background, and then I really want to devote most of the time to having a conversation, to learning and understanding where you all are coming from. I spent a little time in a classroom, very different though. I taught military history at a military college, and when I told them to pay attention and sit up, they paid attention and sat up. My dad, though, both my parents were teachers. My father-in-law taught for 38 years at Medina High, but a word about my dad, who spent 30 years as a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and one of his last assignments was actually commanding a nuclear missile wing. He decided that what he was going to do as his form of service after getting out was go teach in the 7th grade classroom. And after flying jets for 28 of those years and commanded a nuclear missile wing for the last 2, he lasted 18 months with 7th graders. So hats off to you all and the burden you bear and the work you do. Anne Marie, my wife, spent the first half of her career in the classroom in public schools, at her national education. So this is something very near and dear to both of us, and I know what it is that you all shoulder for the rest of us. And a word about that, when I think about public education, not just in Ohio but across the country, I don't just think about the vehicle by which we train a workforce. I think about the instrument by which we educate citizens. I think about public education as the engine of citizenship in this country, and I think now more than ever we need to double down on that and reinvest in it. I mentioned that I taught history at a military college. I think historically you probably have to go back 50 years to 1968 to find an election as politically significant as 2018 it is for us in America today. And if we needed any reminder of that, I think today is a pretty impactful one. As a Navy combat recon pilot, at least half of my missions were off of Russia. I don't know if you're following us on Twitter, but I made a pretty strong point about having flown those missions and seeing firsthand that Russia is not our friend, and we have leadership now that doesn't seem to appreciate that. And I think the real outrage is the lack of accountability in Washington, a government that is not living up to its fundamental role. I'm speaking of Congress, to serve as a check and balance against the executive. I think about that in terms of the oath of office. I swore as a Navy pilot. I was 22 years old. I'm trying to do the math in my head, so 22 years ago, which wasn't to a party. It certainly wasn't to a president. It was to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I see running for office now as a continuation of that public service and an attempt to live up to that oath. I made the decision in my gut during 2016 when I saw that election and what it seemed like it was doing to us as a country, and I thought about the buddies I'd left behind in Iraq and Afghanistan, and just this visceral feeling that we were not honoring their memory, the ones who didn't come home. I thought about my 3 kids, all of whom are in public schools, by the way, and wanting them to inherit the same country I fought for. And I decided to jump into the fray, to get off the sidelines and quit complaining about our politics and run for office. But that meant leaving the best job I'd ever had, which was, after serving 9 years in the Navy, I went on to lead Team Rubicon Global, a disaster relief organization that has retrained 50,000 military vets to deploy into disaster zones around the world. A lot of places, a lot of disasters you might have heard of, and quite a few you probably haven't. We've deployed to nearly 300 disasters around the globe, most right here in the U.S., but as the leader of the organization, I deployed to the Philippines after the strongest typhoon in recorded human history. We were literally doing surgeries and delivering babies on 2 school desks. Are you going to pull it off? Are you going to be one of the people we need to restore some accountability in Washington and be a real voice for maturity, for sanity in the midst of all the insanity that's going on. So that's why I'm running. Ultimately, it goes back to the oath of office I swore to the Constitution, not to a party. That country over party slogan is not something we just arrived at. It's how I've lived my life. And when I talk about that oath to the Constitution, what I'm really talking about is an oath to all of you, because the first 3 words are "we the people," and I believe with every fiber of my being, because it's what I fought for, that we the people are going to show that America in 2018 remains a self-correcting democracy. I will leave it there for my remarks, because I would love to hear from you about the biggest issues in the district for educators. All yours. And I will cold call, having been at the head of a classroom before, if I have to, but I know I won't have to. Who's got a question? Yes?
I'll raise a question. There are many issues that terrify a lot of people in our education system. One of the things, I have a daughter. I'm not personally in education today, although in my past I have been. I have a daughter who is an occupational therapist for the school system. And I know there's a lot of discussion within her school system about employees carrying guns. And my daughter said, I'll have to quit my job because I'm not carrying a gun. And she was in the military for a number of years. And I'm sure she knows how to use a gun, but she doesn't believe in it. And I think that's terrifying. And this may just be my imagination, but I'm concerned about all the shootings and all the slaughters that have gone on at the schools, that people are going to really, I think more individuals will start to do homeschooling. And that, I know my niece in Dayton, Ohio, when Columbine happened, she and her husband made a decision then to homeschool their children, and they're in college today. But I don't know, I'd like to hear the opinion of others who are in the school system today.
I think we're beginning to see some of that already. One of the most heartbreaking conversations I've had on the campaign trail was with a gentleman who came up to me after a town hall and said, my 10-year-old daughter, this was a couple of weeks before school ended, he said, my daughter came up to me and said she's so excited for summer to start, and he answered, great, what are you looking forward to? And she said, no, I'm just glad that I won't have to worry about getting shot. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about a conversation I had with Katie, my 13-year-old. I've got Katie, who's 13, Lizzie, who's 8, and Henry, who's 6, and we were coming back from school, and she was telling me about their latest active shooter drill. And it wasn't so much that they had an active shooter drill, it was how she was talking about it. Like it was just a regular part of the school day, like lining up for lunch or a fire drill, and it occurred to me in that moment that my first active shooter drill was in Kabul, Afghanistan, in the middle of a war zone. And we're treating my 13-year-old 7th grade classroom like a war zone. Yeah.
Well, my great-grandson, who is now 5, was in pre-kindergarten at River Tree, which is a program that many of you will recommend. They have those exercises. He's 5.
Yeah. Yeah. What are folks around the table seeing and experiencing on this? I'm sure it's just a fact of life these days.
I work in a high school. I've been there 26 years. And I sit at the top of the steps every day and watch the kids come in. I don't know if you remember, I sit at my bench and I watch. I'm a counselor in the building. So, I watch for abnormalities, just unusual behaviors. I'm a pretty decently trained counselor. I have martial arts skills. I also have pretty solid with a 9mm. That probably terrifies some of you. But if I ever have to look down the business end of an AR-15, which happens, I hope it doesn't happen, but I want to have more of an opportunity to defend myself and the kids than throwing a textbook at that AR-15. I'm trained for that. I can dial in and get a pretty good focus. So your daughter should not have a weapon. That's not her, that's not her wheelhouse. We have a mental health crisis in America. We have students that are more anxious today than in any time in history. And we have eliminated counselors across this district for sure. Where I work, we've eliminated our counseling staff. So a lot of our teachers have to be counselors as well. Our secretaries have to be counselors. But until we can get a handle on the mental health issue that's out there, we do have to be able to handle a situation if it may arise. And you have to have a contingency plan. By the time the snipers get there, it's over 2 or 3 times. By the time law enforcement arrives, it's done. It's over. So as a public school employee, I would be willing to defend myself, the kids, other staff.
Can we talk about the mental health component? Because I know it's obviously a nationwide issue, but Stark County in particular, it feels like an epidemic. And I'm talking about the young people hurting themselves, the 1,544 who sought counseling for mental health crises when the CDC came in and did the student interviews. Something like 10.5% talked about having made plans to hurt themselves or others. And that's anomalous. That is much higher than the national average and much higher than the historical average in Stark County, where historically there's been 1 to 2 suicides per year. Does anyone have a perspective on how we got to this point?
I have something to say about
Yes.
that. I think that in a lot of the circles where I matriculate, the general community feels it's the responsibility of the school system to fix that. And so I guess I always, when I have the opportunity to speak, say, schools are there to protect kids, to work with kids, but this is a community issue. And it really, the underlying causes stem from the root causes of poverty and stress and unemployment and things that have a lot more to do with things outside the school system than inside the school system. So I guess one of my questions to you is, while we're talking about mental health, what ideas or platforms or strategies do you have with regard to poverty
Some
and
of these
also
anxieties and mental health crises, we can learn a lot from other groups that have gone through this and have come up with solutions. I think about my time in the military and then as president of Team Rubicon Global, one of the things we realized was that with our 50,000 vets, we needed to build our own social safety net. We needed to build our own structures to help those of our buddies who were in a dangerous place personally. A little commentary on the side, it's a real tragedy and an indictment of the VA and our political leadership that we had to build that ourselves, but we did it because lives were at stake. And at Team Rubicon, we realized that the most important thing to keep that vet, and I think you can draw the analogy to a community, a school community or a community of young people was a sense of community, a sense that they could reach out to someone and ask for help. And we trained thousands of our own members in ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. I've been through the course. It is the gold standard on recognizing the symptoms and being that front line of defense to treat it. It's not an expensive course. I think it would really serve this community well to have people in every single school who understand those signs. And my first choice would be to put counselors through Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training to recognize those symptoms when we see them. We had to backstop that with a full-time mental health clinician on staff, so that if the crisis was beyond the skills of the person on the front lines, they were one phone call away from an expert. And then behind that full-time clinician, we had a network of thousands of volunteer mental health clinicians in every community where Team Rubicon is, that were on call in case a member in trouble needed to talk to someone right there. And just the law of large numbers would tell you that as president of the organization, I was getting a call every week about a member in crisis. And I'll share just one of those stories with you because it is, we lost a few, of course, as we were figuring this out, but this was one of the ones that we saved, and it proved that building that sense of community and support can work. I got a call from a member in crisis in Colorado who wasn't calling to be talked out of killing himself. He was calling to apologize. And you'll find you hear that a lot. He was calling to say, I'm sorry, it's nobody's fault. I can't live with the nightmares anymore. In the veteran community, it's often PTSD that drives people to this ultimate decision. He said, I just can't live with the nightmares anymore, and I just want everyone to know that it's no one's fault. I'm gonna end it. Thank God it was October 30th, because he said, Halloween, October 31st is my niece's favorite holiday. I don't want to ruin it for her, so I'm going to do it the day after. And that gave us a little over 24 hours to get all the gears moving, those safety nets that I talked about. We got his best friend out to Colorado, who was ASSIST trained, to be with him, to ask all the right questions. Is there a gun in the house? What are you taking? Those kinds of things. We immediately got him into a program. We saved his life, and he's one of our best members today, which proves the point that the suicidal ideation that you hear so many young people express, like I've heard veterans express, is temporary. You can get folks through it if you have that community of caring people to get them through it. And I share this with every group of young people I talk to, and I probably don't need to tell it to you, but if you have a chance to share this as well. There is a choice that a young person has to make when hearing a friend confess this kind of thing, whether to betray that confidence or to go tell a grown-up who can help. Betray the confidence and tell the grown-up that you've got a friend who needs help. I think about my own kids in their school and this crisis that we're going through in Stark County, and I know that's a horrible thing to ask a young person to do when a friend comes to them and says, I'm thinking about hurting myself, I'm thinking about killing myself. Talk to a grown-up, talk to a trusted counselor or teacher and say, we got to do something, even if it means the end of that friendship temporarily. That life is more important. Yes, sir.
There's some things that I'm going to piggyback off what she said, and something that I heard a little bit there, but I think we need to talk about a little more. Is several things combined together that I think is causing some issues, not just here, but nationwide. She touched upon poverty is a huge issue. I think, and I know that we have issues, and looking at the violence, looking at poverty, in the system where I am, which is a system I'm a product of. I grew up in a home where there was not much. What's changing now? What I'm seeing now, and having taught the school I went to, not only do we have this fear of violence in school, but what is unique, I don't necessarily say unique, is these kids already are going home to places where there is not that sense of safety. So our kids are not saying, I'm glad it's summer because I'm going to a neighborhood where these things are happening as well. And what I'm also seeing, and it's happening with our public schools, and there is not support, and it's not just money, but it's support. Those things are not happening in our cities where there are these public schools. What we also are not doing, and I'm hearing this discussion of mental health with our young people, we are not doing much, perhaps as much as we could do with mental health with their parents, because these kids are in homes where they're not being accepted. We have a climate in this nation right now that is not one of acceptance. These kids are there are pockets in the community where these kids, if there's this feeling in myself that I am something that is different, that I am something that is not going to be accepted, I may not even talk to someone before I consider doing something. I certainly can't go home because I may have parents who are dealing with some issues of their own. There may be no outlet or services for them when these kids leave us. Should they leave us and graduate with us still with these issues that they have mentally, they're going out and they're having kids. And they're in these homes where mental illness runs rampant, the lack of understanding of what it does to help those kids get out of it. I've had parents, I'm thinking of a mother who walked a couple miles to school to talk to me about what she had, a brilliant daughter, what she had to do to help her daughter just fill out applications for colleges, and how these types we don't offer we don't have as much for them. And this is a lady who had some, but I know that her spouse was not there, did not have the mental wherewithal to do that. We don't have this. There's a schism happening between the public schools and perceptions of what's happening in public schools to those who are not. I've seen how sometimes our communities are looked at. I go to things where I see these schools are popping up that are not public schools, where they can throw candy, throw something at someone to get them to come to the schools, but they're not throwing relationships at people. They're not engaging these kids. When these kids find something that they can hook into, they can find a place they belong, you'll see some of those things, to some extent, will go away. When a kid gets a foothold and finds himself and finds the passion, but you can't, it's not happening with these schools being, the schools being taken over and public schools being phased out. We're literally throwing these kids away. And but they don't go away that easily, and then they end up becoming problems for us. There's so many things you have to deal with, but you have to address the parents. You have to address what's happening in our cities. You have to address the public schools, and you have to let those kids know that they mean something. Because they do. I want to understand a little bit more about the piece of it you were talking about with these other schools attracting students in. Are we talking about charter schools? Yeah. I was at a fest a couple weekends ago, and there was one of them just popping out the candy. Here's some glow bracelets. Here's some candy. Come to our school. And where these parents are, this is a temporary fix to get this kid quiet. Well, let me see. Maybe you can help my kid. They don't know how to make that. They don't know that what we're doing for them. They don't know the programs that we're offering, and these people don't care about that. These kids.
Well, and I think that's one thing that Kansas City is really suffering is because we deal with some of the toughest population in Stark County.
And we have amazing kids.
And so I know, and I'm a 7th grade teacher. Kelly was my co-teacher in the classroom. We function more as counselors. Like I feel like 80% of the time I'm teaching my kids how to be human beings. And then 20% of the time, I'm actually working on curriculum. So our test scores aren't where they're supposed to be. And we all know that the state is holding that as are you a successful teacher? Can you get your kids to pass this test? Right. No, but I got my kid to not die. Okay, like they lived through the school year, so that's where I felt like my focus should be. But the test scores don't show it, so the state says we're failing our kids. They come in and take over, or we've got charter schools. Let's give our kids some choices because the public schools are failing.
Yes.
Our kids, and we're not. we're not failing them, we're busting our butts.
In my evaluation
But
this
where are
year
our priorities?
was based on last year's kids, not even kids I had in my classroom this year. My evaluation for who I am as a teacher this year was based on scores from kids I had last year who had all different sorts of issues, who we have not done anything for them outside of what to make them even that much better when they come in, to make them that much stronger. But do not tell me that that's who I am as an educator, because as she said, we are taking care of all these other things because there's no one there to, or no one knows how to, because these parents want to. Many of them really, really do. They want our help too.
Yeah.
And we're just throwing them away.
And so when it comes to the charters, what's sort of their business model for coming in? I mean, I'm pretty familiar with some of the bigger ones like ECOT, which is Exhibit A. And let me step back and say that I've talked to some ECOT teachers, and this is not a hit against the teachers, some of whom poured their hearts into that organization and tried to help those kids. But when you inject that for-profit motive, you undermine the entire rationale when the duty, and I would apply this, I know this is an education roundtable, but this is kind of a philosophical point. I think you need to apply this test to any instrument of government that is supposed to be there for the people who are the agents in that organization answerable to. And in the case of a public school, they should be answerable to the community, to the kids, to the parents, not to Wall Street, not to a bottom line, not to a CEO. In the case of a prison, they should be answerable to us, not to the bottom line, not to a company. Is part of the issue the for-profit model for these?
Part of the issue
charters
is
that are
the
coming?
for-profit, because that's what they want. And then when they get tired of the kid, or the parents are tired of whatever the deal is, then they come back to public education, but the money doesn't come back to us. And the laws are a lot more lenient for the charter schools than they are the public schools. And they legislate us as public schools to death. To identify kids with problems, you can take any good kindergarten, preschool teacher, word per his salt, and they can say, this kid, and we can follow that kid. It just doesn't start in middle school, and I'm a middle school teacher. But the amount of paperwork we got to do to prove that we as professionals know that we need to help this child somehow, some way, is absolutely absurd. If my doctor had to fill out 15 forms for every single solitary thing, you know, that's the problem. And we're so far skewed to whatever side it is, away from education, which is our fundamental purpose. We're spending all our time trying to teach them how to behave, trying to teach them how to be good folks. And yeah, our scores do suck, because that's where we're at as public educators, as urban public educators. You take any of us urban public educator teachers and put us in another situation that's not urban, and we're going to win awards and go to Disneyland. But we can't get our scores up because we're over-legislated. And the test score is everything. It's the only number that anybody ever looks at to determine how successful we are.
And what are some of the practical implications of that in a classroom? This is intentionally provocative because Anne Marie complains about this all the time. She wants to teach. She wants to close the door and just teach, but found herself constantly worried about the test that was coming up, or the amount of, and I'll stop here because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the amount of time that testing requires. So yeah, yes, sir.
Well, I don't want to speak on another subject. A perfect example is social studies.
Okay.
I mean, the amount of stuff, I teach all government, AP government, 2 sections of regular government. So the amount of stuff that I could cover outside the curriculum in government or civics or just social studies in general could not be taught or could not be addressed because now I'm teaching to the test. And that phrase goes around education a lot. It's teaching to the test. I got to hit, my 32 content standards in a semester or all year. And just being able to run through a lesson plan or run through a content statement and just running through each standard that we have to teach, the stuff that these kids really do need, just go out the window. And because, like she said, The only thing that matters in education, half of our evaluation is how do they do on the test. Can that kid progress through the system? Well, can he graduate? Did he get his test scores? Did he get his air points? Did he get his credit? Did he get his grade? Did he get his score? It's all based on that number, and not to the point where, us as educators can teach the things that these kids really do need, and it's all teaching to that test.
Right. Sir, you.
I'll piggyback off of what he was saying. I teach in the same building as he does. Randy, biology, social studies, and career planning program called Success. Veteran as well.
Thanks.
Grown, raised at the foot of a union, household, Teamsters, steel workers, you name it. So I just want to piggyback, and I have a question for you, and I'm known as not having many filters, so if you'll excuse me for a moment, but I'll piggyback and I'll use him as an example. I've seen his chair empty and be filled multiple times in my career. So I'm 24 years, and being a veteran, I don't get scared by people with suits and pointy hats running around trying to tell me how to do my job. The kids are the mission, and the mission comes first. But not everybody has the stamina and fortitude to stay in that. And what I'm watching is a lot of really good educators burn out and run like hell as fast as they can. And they're teaching from a place of fear for my job, fear for my health, and fear for my reputation. And there's like very little forgiveness for a mistake these days.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lay any blame on that on the levels above me, the local administration or any of that, because they're feeling the same thing that we're feeling. I could use about a dozen military euphemisms that would be completely inappropriate
Don't
for
do it
this
there.
room.
Right.
But you know what I'm talking about, right? But we're chasing the almighty data,
Yeah.
and that's what it is. And if my numbers don't jive, or my platform that I have to do it doesn't work, or all this, I spend more time chasing the numbers than the kid in front of me gets that attention. And so, without getting into the whole story or anything, the principal that hired me is the principal that arrested me my senior year at high school. And they put a lot of time and effort into me. Introduced me to the military recruiters, the nice people down at the jailhouse, gave me a tour, the whole 9 yards. If somebody had not invested time, instead of worried about my data, I'm probably in that jailhouse or the little yard behind it. So I want to go back to teaching kids and not chasing data. Now my question for you is where I might be, I don't mean to be, you can't do anything if you don't win. When are the Democrats going to stop being so damn nice, pull the gloves off, and go after these people? Because I'm watching you get outmaneuvered with the fear factor. And in a swing state, or a swing district, if you touch guns, you're done, and you know it. If you, then I'm sure you get good campaign people around you telling you this, they're real issues. And if you come after something as big as mental health without a specific example and an answer, they're just going to crush you as the bleeding heart. When do the gloves come off, and when do we come after them for the frauds that they are? And tell the truth, because that's what I'm looking for. The veteran and the union worker sitting here waiting for the fluff to go away and for the gloves to come off.
Well, the good news, and I don't want to make this super partisan, but I'm going to answer your question, is that one of the advantages of, we got the Stark County political reporter here, so I know I'm going to get in trouble, but whatever. One of the advantages of a party in some disarray is that we're running a local race. We are speaking to the issues that Ohioans care about, that folks in Ashland and Massillon and Holmes County and Coshocton care about, and we're getting all the leash we need. I mean, one of the funny things that happened when we made this red to blue list, which is not something we were gunning for, but it's a real validator. It's the big D Democratic Party saying, all right, you're one of the best races in the country, you can flip this seat. Here you go. Now, will you please stop using the phrase, we need a new generation of leadership in Washington? After which we immediately put out a press release saying we need a new generation of leadership in Washington. Point being, no one is telling us how to run this campaign and what issues to speak to and what minefields to avoid or wade into. And that's the kind of freedom that that I really appreciate. I mean, I'm thinking about it now. It's the kind of freedom I had as a signals intelligence aircraft commander, because we were one plane, one crew, operating out of remote location, thousands of miles from home, and some days that's what running this campaign feels like, and I love it because it's about what's happening here on the ground, and we're speaking to the healthcare crisis. We're speaking, well, that is a national issue, but we're speaking to the opioid epidemic, which we're not getting our left and right laterals from the party on that. We're talking to folks on the ground here about that. We're speaking to the assaults on labor. I mean, I was out there with the 1297 in Spencer, who walked out of the factory, the machinists union, because they weren't getting injury time, fighting for injury time and basic stuff. Or the union down in Tusk, who walked out because they were refusing to add their spouses to their health care plans. And now you see this full frontal assault from Janus. I don't know if you've read about this latest Supreme Court case that just pulls it completely pulls the rug out from under generations of precedent and the power of us to stick together to demand safe workplaces and the ability to bargain collectively and link arms and be stronger together. I mean, that is going to be really, really hard now, and I think it's because people have forgotten that unions built the middle class. And it's not a foregone conclusion that we'll keep that if we don't keep linking arms and sticking together as the folks who make this economy run, the workers. So yeah, the short answer to your question is not waiting for permission from anyone to hit back. We're telling it like it is. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I just want to go back to the state test real quick. And by the way, we're well represented from Kansas City Schools, about a dozen here. So these are issues to us. So the test. But by the way, I want to talk about our kids in Kansas City. They're NBA players, they're NFL players, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're politicians, they're everything you can imagine. But the unfairness that we face is the state tests sometimes take a bit to catch our kids up to speed. And once we start getting there and we're right at about the state level, we're approaching where we need to be. A perfect example, I would say, in the last I want to say 5 or 6 years, our kids took the state standardized test that was the OAA, then it was the OAT, then it was the air test. I'm sorry, I skipped PARC. It was PARC, the air test. And so where's the target? Where are we? And so the ramifications, kid A takes the state test. His score is a validation or an invalidation of the teacher, which then is a validation of all the teachers in the building, which then is the validation of the principal, which then is the validation of the school district, which then goes down to Columbus, and it computes some ridiculousness. And basically the test results come through. Olentangy, whatever, the richest school district is number one, and then you go down and it's a poverty test. It's basically how poor is and that's how it reads. So it's a scam, it's rigged, it's ridiculous. I mean, for a perfect example, they give a standardized test. And take Columbus for example. There's 59 native tongues at any given time, and they're giving them a standardized test. And so of course the scores are whatever you want them to be, and so the ramifications of that mean that because your school district is performing so poorly, let's bring in all these charter schools. The public has no clue, absolutely zero, that they're funding 2 separate school systems, and they keep trying to pass school levies. And nobody even understands this, that the money follows the kid from the charter school, or the funds get siphoned from the public school system, they follow the kid. Just on our way over here, we heard a advertisement, and they're calling themselves, this is public education. I mean, they're really blurring the lines now. So the charter. So anyway, you couple that with the Janus decision, and that is a public education issue, because if you look at states without unions, South Carolina, for example, every teacher in their state has a one-page copy of the contract. Here you go, sir. Where versus ours is 256, and it's not, because those are real issues that management and labor worked out at one point for the sake of productive learning environments. And so all that stuff is really weighing heavily in our district.
My wife taught in South Carolina when I was in the Navy. She had a coworker assaulted by a student, spent a couple weeks in the hospital, and was afraid to go back to the same classroom, even though that student was expelled and prosecuted, afraid to go back to that same environment. Did not have the protection of her fellow teachers linking arms and saying, we're gonna make it right for this person. And based on the terms of that contract sheet, she was let go. That's what Janice is poised to do for everybody around the country now. And this isn't just a public employees issue. I think it's going to affect everyone. It's a quality of life issue. It sure as heck is a worker safety issue. In Ohio, last year there were 24 workplace fatalities. 21 of them were in non-unionized work environments. I don't know how much clearer you could make the case that we have to be able to stick together to take care of each other. I'm really worried about what Janice is going to do. For those of you on the leadership side, is there a game plan to answer the threat that Janice poses? What's our next step? And I will submit to you when I'm talking to the guys on the shop floor, which is a different work environment but some of the same challenges. Their strategy is to convince one by one every young person that comes out onto that floor that you need to sign the card, you need to join up. I know that dues payment every month is, it might feel like it hurts until you need us.
Well, that's the thing, is the OEA has been putting some safeguards in place, because what we lost is fair share.
Okay.
But in Kansas City, we don't have fair share, is that right, Paul?
No, we do have fair share.
Oh, we do have fair share? Okay. When I taught at North Canton as well, and they did not have fair share. I think they only had 3 teachers that were not members of the union.
Okay.
So our task now is to make the union relevant to our conservatives who feel like maybe the union doesn't speak for them, and that's a hard task for the leadership to do that. Because I know that I worked in a building with a couple of teachers who said, if there's no fair share, I'm not joining.
Yeah.
But we have to make it relevant, because it is relevant. Because we are democracy in the workplace, and
you elect your own your leaders.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think it's,
Sorry.
I think it's appalling to find out that over $2 billion were funneled into charter schools or alternative education.
Yes.
We used to have a separate pot where education money from levies and whatever went into, and we knew exactly what was in there, and they would be parceled out to the 619 districts. But our legislature decided to throw it into one pot with everything else, and you can't keep a finger on how much is coming in and how much is going out, except we do have a legal group that is doing that. But we never voted on that. We as Ohioans didn't have a chance to say, we don't want this done. We believe in public schools. We take everybody, we do the best we can, even though we have our plates out. And we're wondering how much more is going to go on that plate that we have to do in the classroom. Teachers are complaining they can't even teach anymore. And I'm hearing that here too.
It is no accident that money being commingled is so hard to follow. ECOT alone took $1 billion of public education resources for the title itself should raise red flags for anyone with a conscience, an online for-profit charter school with graduation rates of less than 30%, attendance rates of less than 40%. And if you ask yourself, how did something like this happen? How did we let it happen follow the money, and you look at the amount of money that ECOT and similar outfits pumped into both parties, frankly, in the form of campaign contributions. And you get your answer. Columbus is bought and paid for by lobbyists. I'm running against a guy who gets nearly 90% of his campaign contributions from corporations. We get 0%. We took the zero corporate PAC pledge. It's from folks just like you, and that's the real outrage. Actually, is that it's totally legal. I think about the incumbent who's supposed to be representing us, who sits on two powerful committees, and even though he has literally never passed a piece of legislation, just by virtue of sitting on those powerful committees, he can, before lunchtime, cast his votes to regulate, or as is more often the case, deregulate the industries he's overseeing, and after lunch, he can pick up the phone and totally legally call the leaders of those corporations that his committees are overseeing and raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's how you raise the big money as an incumbent who's taking money from corporate PACs. We got to beat them on the backs of actual human beings who believe in what we're trying to do, a couple bucks at a time. This is not a fundraising pitch. It's an indictment of a political system that is beholden to the biggest donors. That's how we got into the charter school crisis that we're in. Not a blanket indictment of charter schools, because there's some out there that are taking the nonprofit ones, the nonprofit ones who are doing their darndest to handle some of the tougher cases, but the for-profit ones, I just don't think that's the right motivation in a school. Yes, ma'am.
I may be the enemy in the room, but I started a charter school, Project Rebuild. I don't know if any of you have heard of Project Rebuild. At the time, I worked for the Alcohol and Drug Board of Starr County. And in the high schools, or in the middle schools at that time, there were programs that dealt with drug addiction, programs like PANDA and Teen Institute. Those programs don't exist anymore, I don't think. I did not work in the schools with the students, but I worked with the staff members that implemented those programs. And at the time, Canton City Schools' dropout rate was 50%.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, my God, where are these young people and what are we doing to re-engage them? And at the time, Bob Taft was the governor of the state of Ohio, and his wife, Hope Taft, had the same certification that I did. And in the field of chemical dependencies, there are two disciplines. 80% of the budget across the country goes to treatment. Prevention gets 20%, and obviously that's backwards. But anyhow, Hope Taft and I would have to go to the trainings to continue our continuing education units to maintain our licensures. And she and I would often sit up at night talking about what we'd really like to be doing. And I shared with her my dismay at what the dropout rate in Kansas City schools was. And she said, Carolyn, you need to go to Dayton and look at this Youth Build program. They work with high school dropouts to re-engage them, and they teach them the construction skills. So eventually I went to Dayton, and I met with the director, and I was so impressed with what they were doing with these high school dropouts that I didn't want to come home. I wanted to stay there and see, how do you do this? And after many conversations on the phone, I was offered a job in Dayton, and I said, I would like to work with you to learn what you're doing, but there are kids in Starr County that need this just like they do in Dayton. So they offered me an internship, so I quit my job. I rented a room in Dayton for a year, and I worked in that program. I learned their funding sources. The main funding sources at that time were Ameriprise and Youth Build USA. I got to know the grant writer for those programs. At the end of my year as an intern, I came back to Canton, and I worked with a committee of volunteers, and we put a grant application together. We got that grant. And the kids that we worked with were obviously, as I said, high school dropouts. And our program recruited these students to come in because we taught them the construction trades. And the program that they entered was up to 2 years.
Right.
So when they worked on the construction site, they were paid for their time. That was the hook that got these young people back into the education system. And at that time, that program became very well known in the school systems because I would get a phone call from Jackson Township from the superintendent and say, we're going to lose this kid to education if we don't do something to engage him. And so we worked with kids from all over the county. And when we first started, and when the program first began, I would take 5 or 6 kids to lunch. And I would really get to know them and talk to them. Overwhelmingly, these kids, many of them went to as many as 17 elementary schools. They couldn't even tell you any longer all the schools they had been to. The program started in '98. And in 2003, we got a charter from the University of Toledo to open a nonprofit.
That's the key.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you're answering your own questions, by the way.
It was a nonprofit charter school. And guess what? Eventually, we were graduating like 20 kids a year. You know, this was an amazing accomplishment for these young people. You know, I retired, and the program isn't doing any of those things anymore.
Well, I think Youth Build USA in particular is one of these case studies. It's now a national program. If I'm not mistaken, Dorothy Stoneman was the leader of it.
The first year that we were in operation for our annual meeting, Hope Taft was our guest speaker. She brought people into our fundraising event for that. The following year is Dorothy Stoneman.
Yeah, so I knew Dorothy, and when you have that kind of energy at the top and the mission that puts the kids in the community first, and for Dorothy, it was never a bottom line calculation. It was about the kids, and that's the difference between a good charter school and
I hear from those young people still today. You know, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, we built homes. We didn't build little habitat homes, although we did build one habitat house. I mean, we built beautiful homes. We renovated homes. And this, you know, and these young people would bring their grandparents. They said, I helped do this.
Right.
You know, so there are some nonprofits that are really good charter programs. Not all. It's like everything else.
Yes.
Some are good and some are poor.
And I think if there's, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I just wanted to say, my husband and I are not teachers. We came to this meeting because our wonderful neighbor, but we do live in Canton City, and we do support the school levies every time. I'm very shocked at what you said about the money splitting off, not going, you know, primarily.
About 11 million to our charter schools.
We moved there in 1987, and we have seen our neighborhoods. My neighbor Karen over there, we have seen our neighborhood go up and down, but we have always said schools, teachers, firemen, police, community, and I'm so thrilled to see everybody here and to meet you, and that's the main reason why we came, because you're like a light, you know, and we just went, I gotta go and meet this person. Just from the little bit that I've heard about you, I'm so very grateful to you and so thrilled that you're running for office. And I have tried to reach the other person who's running on the other side.
It's hard.
It's impossible, and there's no connection to community, the things that are fundamental to us. And so all of you are teachers, I'm assuming, and we really appreciate you. And we live in a neighborhood where these kids live. And all of us try to support and guide them towards something. I asked these one house up the street from us, the kids were not allowed in the house, so they had to play on a front porch. And I said, what are you going to, I always try to engage them, what are you going to do when you grow up? I'm going to be a video game player, I'm going to be a pro football player. And I'm like, no. You know, try to aim for something that is doable and learn your English and take care of your teeth. That's where the, you know, I think it comes from everything, but teachers are the front line of our whole community. And even, you know, more important than the community almost, because you are the people that are you're doing it, you're making it work and giving these kids direction, and it's just horrible I'm very sad to hear what is being done to your profession. But I'm very grateful for
Thank
you, Ms. Harbaugh.
I'm getting the sign from the back of the room. I want to 10 more minutes. Just reflect on that comment, because I think increasingly teachers have become the social safety net. They are the backstop when social services can't do its job anymore because they're under resources, when the local hospital, you talk about take care of your teeth. I know you meant it sort of tongue in cheek, but I've been doing a lot of ride-alongs with the Stark County Sheriffs and with the fire department, and on one of these we rolled up to a domestic disturbance. It was, I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. It was a Thursday night, and we had already broken up a couple of fights and rolled in on a couple of domestic disturbances. And I turned to the deputy and said, "Deputy Kirk, this is crazy. This is a rough night." And Deputy Kirk laughed and said, "This is a slow night. Come back on a weekend and you'll see what we're dealing with." And not long after that, we rolled up to a trailer park in Stark County at 2 a.m. and the front porch light came on, and a little girl stepped out, Katie's age, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's not like she had her jammies on, right? She steps into the light, and when Deputy Kirk opened the squad door, the dome light came on, and this little girl said from the porch, "A lady cop? I've always wanted to be a lady cop. I didn't know there were lady cops." And my first thought was, that's pretty great. A young person who still has the dream and the idealism of wanting to grow up and serve their community. And then we took in the surroundings and we interviewed the mom and realized that this kid was not getting to school, had never been to the dentist. And it occurred to me that unless I saw this kid as I saw my own kid, unless we all do, we're not going to interrupt this vicious cycle. And I feel like in 2018, we are at a fork in the river, and we either go down one branch of the river in which we are all islands floating and sinking on our own merits or luck or the community we were born into, or we take the other fork and we see ourselves as a community. And to me, that's what makes a nation, is that we're in it together, and we take care of each other, and we see that little kid in some way as our own kid. And I think that is what you guys bring to the job every single day, and that's why I thank you. I thank you for that, and thanks for the comment. Yeah, I saw a question I thought it was yes.
I have to say that I truly blame the Department of Education for part of this, because they're very lax with charter schools to do something about their attendance records. I think they're fixing the records, and the state isn't doing anything about it.
Well, if you're going to Washington, what you're going to be battling is they want to merge.
Labor and...
Please do not let it happen.
Well, and that is not a policy intended to economize on government. It is a policy intended to undermine. And you see a lot of the decisions being made now, and I could point to almost any department of the federal government, but I'll pick one that mattered a lot to me as a Navy pilot, the State Department. The attempt to cut 30% of the State Department budget, the failure to fill mid and senior level roles in the State Department wasn't incompetence, although there's a lot of that. It was an overt attempt to kill the department. And I think we're seeing that with education, with labor, with others. I wouldn't be fooled by these smoke screens that talk about economies of scale and things like that. There is an all-out assault on the social safety net, and that is absolutely part of it. To your point about DOE and charter schools, Ohio has the loosest rules in the nation on charter school oversight. And that's something that I meant to say after your comments and yours, but that is part of the reason we're in the bind we are, is because we have a state house that has refused to do its job, and I think intentionally is looking the other way because of the money they're taking in. Yeah.
Just
Yes.
really, I got this in the mail today. I thought it was pretty ironic that I was coming today. And
You
this
paid
is-
for that, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure I did. So his only thing is about opioid epidemic. Like, that's what he's securing families from the threat of illegal drugs. But he won't take your call.
I want to speak to that because he hasn't been talking about that for 8 years, and he suddenly decides,
Right.
after 8 years of voting to gut rural treatment centers, to close rural clinics. I mean, on the opioid epidemic, which is the arterial wound in this district, when I think about it, I think about it in terms of being a disaster responder, and I've been in some pretty rough environments. I know an epidemic when I see one. I've been in refugee camps on the verge of epidemic outbreaks. That's what we're looking at here. And every single deputy from Stark County onwards that I've ridden along with will tell you some version of, we can't just arrest our way out of this problem. It's crazy to think we can. What they're trying to say is it's an epidemic, it's a medical phenomenon we have to treat, but when we have you get the feeling with this administration and with folks like Bob Gibbs that they have one tool in their toolkit, and that's a hammer, and so every problem looks like a nail, and they're talking about reigniting the war on drugs, which was not only a miserable failure the first time, it was heavily prejudicial towards certain communities. And I mean, we need to atone for that, but we need to learn from it as well and realize that the opioid epidemic is an epidemic. That is step one, and we need to hold the folks accountable who got us into this fix, from the pharmaceutical companies who manufactured an epidemic, first epidemic in human history that was manufactured, to the leaders or the supposed representatives in Washington who refused to treat it like a medical phenomenon. And I'll tell you, having spent some time in the Stark County Jail as a guest, that is the worst place you could wind up if you want to kick the habit. It is a vicious cycle, and unless we start treating it like what it is and funding the treatment centers, I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with a grandparent or a sibling who talks about bringing their loved one to the treatment center, and the charge nurse signing them in says, "Thank you so much for arriving at this point. It is a critical step on that path to recovery," and then choking back tears says, "Come back in 3 weeks, we might have a bed available." They almost never make it back in 3 weeks. That is not the sign of someone who appreciates this crisis for what it is and still votes to defund those centers. I'm getting the flag from the back. All right, I'm going to veto and say one more question. There's going to be a zinger out there. Oh, they're going to kick us out? Well, all right. Thank you all. One quick question from someone who has... Well, no, we have someone leading off applause. That's like my cue, right? Seriously, one of the values of our team, of this campaign, is accessibility. Please reach out if you've got any more questions. I think there's probably contact info on the sheet. If there's not, we respond right away to email or to the Facebook request. Please stay in touch. This is a grassroots campaign. The other side is always going to have more money, and brace yourself, because come September, or maybe even August, we're going to start to see those hit ads on the airwaves. But one thing we have that the other side doesn't is you. It's people. We're knocking on thousands of doors every week. We're making tens of thousands of phone calls, because I think we've got to get back to the hard work of democracy, which is talking to each other. That's how I'm leading this campaign. That is value number one. and we could really use your help. Thanks all so much for coming out. Please stay in touch. Thanks.